Welcome to my second part of episode 9. If you haven't heard the first section, please listen to 9A first. So, the Nintendo Entertainment System was released, and the Control Deck pack would come with a revolutionary game called Super Mario Bros., released on the 13th of September 1985, which until Wii Sports was released would be the greatest selling game of all time, selling 40.23 million games. So how did such a hugely successful game come about? Well, after the success in Mario Bros. In the arcades in 1983, Shigeru Miyamoto and his team wanted to make a world not confined by a single screen, like the game Pitfall was. He also loved as a kid to roam through the Japanese countryside, and the excitement he felt in discovering a secret tunnel or cave, and so he wanted to recreate that in the game. So he interspersed the scrolling levels with hidden secrets, shown as pipes because Mario was now a plumber. But for the enemies, many were taken from Mario's previous game, and so they had quite a turtle-based theme, and they retained the hitting blocks to knock over enemies, and also released power-ups and coins. Also, as a child, Miyamoto loved fantastical stories, such as Alice in Wonderland, and like the book, he added a power-up that would make Mario larger if he ate something. Finally, he added evil mushroom enemies in this magical world for you to encounter. The game was taking form, and now it only needed a story. Sticking with his usual simple theme, it had Princess Toadstool, only later did she become Princess Peach, who had been kidnapped by the evil Bowser, who is king of the Koopas, and his band of evil turtles who have come to the Mushroom Kingdom and turned everybody into stone. It's up to Mario and his brother Luigi to save her and the Mushroom Kingdom. The game was made now, and it just needed some music, which was composed by Koji Kondo, who had joined Nintendo in 1983 and only had done a handful of titles up to this point. But he would put together some of the greatest music ever to grace video games, perfectly capturing the magical world of Mario was in. Koji went on to do most of the music released in all Mario games, and also Zelda. Mario had arrived, and he would continue to take the world by storm with his perfect level designs, hidden secrets, and gameplay that was far ahead of its time, and still today it is the blueprint for any platform game released since. But Nintendo wasn't all about one game. It was about the constant high quality output for the machine that made the NES console so popular. And so I'm now going to quickly go through some of the great games released on the console up until 1987. Back in January 1985, the great two-player platformer Ice Climber was released and had some of the team who helped write Super Mario Bros. It had you play an Eskimo called Popo or a girl Eskimo, Nana, and had you make your way up the ice mountains whilst avoiding the ice creatures and the polar bears. In December 1985, Bomberman was released by Hudson on the NES, and it was now finally recognisable, with you now playing a robot who had wanted to be free from his bomb factory job by escaping the maze levels. The following year brought Balloon Fight, a sort of cute version of Joust but with balloons. In 1986, Nintendo in Japan released the Family Computer Disk System that would plug in underneath your Famicom console. This allowed you to play games on large floppy disks that would also let you save games. It was a lovely idea, with many great games released for it, utilising that ability to save. It was also much cheaper to produce the floppy disks, meaning less risks to the manufacturers. However, rampant piracy and some reliability issues meant that Nintendo would not do a wide release of the peripheral. Instead, they decided to opt for battery backup ROMs on the cartridges themselves. In 1986, Legend of Zelda was released. Now, the concept back then of open worlds to explore in a console game was unheard of, with all games of the time being about getting a high score and being linear. Designed by Shigeru Miyamoto and his team, they created an open-ended, magical virtual world called Hyrule for you to explore in. Again, Shigeru wanted to capture a sense of his explorations as a child with an active imagination around the small town Sonobe on the edge of Kyoto, where he would go off exploring caves and go on adventures around the countryside or his house's rooms. Now Shigeru had his world. He needed a story for the adventure to unfold in. Sticking with his usual triangle of characters, he had the hero called Link, an everyman non-hero who was an elf boy with a destiny to rescue Princess Zelda from the evil villain Ganon. The name Zelda, interestingly, came from the wife of the American author F. Scott Fitzgerald. He wrote the Great Gatsby book. His wife was called Zelda, and she was very strong-willed for the time, and not at all womanly as women were thought to be back in 1920s. Shigeru had read about her and admired both her interesting name and her attitude, and so based Princess Zelda upon her. It's amazing that both Super Mario Bros. And Legend of Zelda were being designed in tandem by Shigeru, and it was his assurance of getting Super Mario Bros. Gameplay perfected that he would delay Legend of Zelda back to 1986. The game was finished, but it was seen as a real risk by Nintendo, with no one knowing how gamers would cope with the concept of being thrown into a world with very little direction on what to do next. So worried were Nintendo that they began only releasing the game on Nintendo's disk system format, as this format costs a lot less to produce. But so successful was the title that the game was released the following year in 1987 on cartridge. The cartridge included a battery and small memory built in, so that would allow you to save your game. Then there was Dragon Quest, a huge game in Japan. It was known as Dragon Warrior in the US due to a licensing conflict with an RPG firm. But this was one of the first console adventure RPGs released, made by Yuji Horii, and would really kickstart Japan's love of the RPG adventure. There was also Ganbare Goemon Karakuri Dachu by Konami in 1986, a great scrolling beat-em-up adventure game. Goonies was also released by Konami, and it was a great platformer with a lot of depth for the time and based on the fun film released by Steven Spielberg. For those into bizarre games, Takashi no Cassandra, a scrolling beat-em-up adventure, was released in this year in 1986. It broke every rule in the book, with you having to hit certain enemies 20,000 times to kill it, or leaving the control pad untouched for an hour, or even having to sing karaoke. In 1987, Athena was released, which was a fun platform game. Then there was Castlevania in 1987 by Konami. This had you play a vampire hunter on a quest to overthrow Dracula himself. There was Punch-Out, known in the West as Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and it had you become the top boxer by taking on a string of zany cartoon opponents. There was Metroid by Nintendo, designed by Gunpei Yokoi. The game had you play Samus Aran, a bounty hunter in your special suit, as you explore planet Zebes to attack the Mother Brain and her evil space pirates. This game was one of the first to have a female character, although you didn't realise this until you completed the game, that Samus was actually a girl. Capcom released Megaman this year, called Rockman in Japan, which was a tough but enjoyable arcade run and gun. Kid Icarus, also by Nintendo's Gunpei Yokoi, was released this year, and this was a great fun platform game. Wizards and Warriors by Rare had you take on a knight through a fantasy world. And finally there was Final Fantasy by Square, designed by Hironobu Sakaguchi. It took what was great about Dragon's Quest and Legend of Zelda and ran with it, building a compelling story and characters. Nintendo had full control of the Japanese and American markets, but for those in Europe it was an unknown console, with the machine not being made available to us until 1986, and in some countries 1987. This allowed Europe to take a different gaming path, with home computers being allowed to thrive. We'll discuss this in episode 11, but for the next episode I want to look back at the classic arcade games released around this time. So until next time, see you later.